So England are the reigning champions of the Women's Euros. However, they were far from convincing at times during their run to the title, and there were some tactical issues that, if they are not addressed, could prove costly in the defense of their title. So in this video, we're going to do a brief tactical breakdown of England and what England need to improve ahead of the next European Championships, which is being co-hosted by Switzerland, Finland, Norway, and Denmark in 2025. So let's get into it. We'll start with England's best performance in the tournament, which was arguably their group stage match against Denmark. England dominated the game and were ruthless in front of goal, winning 4-0. This was important because it was the first time ever that England had beaten Denmark in a competitive fixture. And this victory also meant that England finished top of the group, which gave them a favorable path to the final as they avoided the likes of Spain, France, and Germany until the latter stages of the competition. What was interesting about this match, though, was how Sarina Wiegman set up her team. Now, normally England play in a back four, but in this game she opted for a back three. And I think this was done to try and counteract the threat posed by Denmark's wingers, which we'll touch upon shortly. But essentially this meant that England played in a 3-4-3 formation, although it's worth mentioning that this isn't the most accurate depiction, as Alex Greenwood would often overlap and therefore become more of an attacking fullback rather than a wing-back. And England started the game very brightly, and within 8 minutes, they had already scored, and it was Rachel Daly who got on the score sheet. Now this is interesting because Daly actually plays her club football as a left-back for Aston Villa, but since arriving on the international stage, she has been deployed as a left-sided centre-back in this back three. For England, Daly has been one of the standout performers for England throughout this entire tournament, and this is probably down to her versatility and willingness to learn new roles, which has been crucial for England. The second goal then came just before halftime, and it was Alicia Russo who scored it. And the build-up play for this goal is really interesting because it shows the movement and intelligence that England possess in the final third. As you can see here, James does brilliantly to beat her woman and get to the byline. She then cuts it back and it looks like Russo is going to go for goal. However, she lays it off to Kelly, who in turn lays it back to Russo, who finishes confidently. Now, it's a simple finish, but what's important here is that both players understand their movement and positioning in and around the penalty area. Kelly knows that she has the better shooting opportunity, so she lays it off to Russo, who is the more clinical finisher. And this understanding between the two is what makes England such a dangerous side going forward. England's third goal came midway through the second half, and it was Lauren Hemp who got on the score sheet after another good team move. Now, once again, this wasn't a moment of individual brilliance, but it was a well-worked team move that involved quick passing and movement, and it ended with Hemp slotting home from close range. And England's fourth goal came late on, and it was Chloe Kelly who got on the score sheet after latching onto a through ball. This was a more individual goal and showed Kelly's pace and power as she held off her defender and slotted past the onrushing goalkeeper. All in all, this was a dominant performance from England, and it was a display that showed the strength of this team, which include their tactical flexibility, their movement and intelligence in the final third, and their ability to be ruthless in front of goal. However, it's worth mentioning that Denmark weren't at full strength, as they were without some key players including Pernille Harder. But regardless, this was still an impressive performance from England, and it's a match that they will want to build on as they look to retain their title. Now, while England's attacking play was impressive against Denmark, their defending was also solid, and this was largely due to the instructions that Sarina Wiegman gave her team. Now, England's back three of Rachel Daly, Millie Bright, and Jess Carter were solid and organized, and they dealt with most of the threats that Denmark posed. The midfielders in front of them worked hard to win the ball back when England lost possession, and they were disciplined in their positioning. And this made it difficult for Denmark to break down England's defense. However, England did come under pressure at times, particularly in the first half, and this was mainly down to the pace and trickery of Denmark's wingers. Now, Denmark's wingers would often take on their full-back and then deliver crosses into the box, and this caused problems for England at times. England's back three were vulnerable to pace and trickery, and this was something that Denmark exploited. However, England were able to withstand the pressure and they were able to keep a clean sheet. In order for England to be successful at the Euros next year, they need to be able to cope with the threat posed by wide players. And this means that they need to be more disciplined in their defending and they need to be able to deal with crosses into the box. If they can do this, then they will be a tough side to beat. One area of concern for England during the tournament was their penalty shootout record. They lost 2 out of 2 of their penalty shootouts, and this included their semi-final against France. Now, penalties are always going to be a lottery, and it's impossible to predict the outcome of a shootout. However, there are things that you can do to improve your chances of winning a penalty shootout. And one of these is to take more penalties during training. If you only practice taking penalties occasionally, then your penalty takers may not be sharp enough when it matters. Now, penalties aren't everything, but if you want to give yourself the best chance of winning a penalty shootout, then you need to practice taking penalties regularly. This will help your penalty takers to build up their confidence, and it will help them to be sharp when it matters. Another thing that England could do to improve their chances of winning a penalty shootout is to have a designated penalty taker. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be the same player every time, but having a list of designated penalty takers can help to ensure that you have players who are willing and able to take penalties when called upon. This is important because you don't want a situation where you're going head-to-head in a penalty shootout and you're relying on a player who isn't willing to take the pressure. Finally, England need to work on their mentality when it comes to taking penalties. It's normal to feel nervous when taking a penalty, but if you can learn to control your nerves, then you'll be more likely to succeed. This can be done through practice and by visualizing success. If you practice taking penalties regularly, then you'll eventually reach a point where you no longer feel nervous when taking a penalty. And if you visualize yourself taking and scoring penalties regularly, then you'll build up a positive mindset when it comes to taking penalties. So overall, England have a lot of positives to take from the recent tournament. They reached the final and they played some good football along the way. However, they also have some areas to improve on if they want to be successful at the Euros next year. One of these is their defending from wide areas and another is their penalty shootout record. If they can improve in these areas, then they will be a force to be reckoned with. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and more importantly, I hope you learned something. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.